Welcome back to our Turning Point series this summer, where we are examining where we've been as a congregation in order to know where we're going along all these different places where our ministry has taken us during Linda's 20 years here. So while she's on sabbatical, we're kind of exploring all these different turning points. Right now, we are talking about the turning point of visioning for inclusion and justice, and this is centered around 15 years ago when we came up with our new mission statement. What we want to do for this series is to talk to different leaders in our own community about the work that they do that's related to this vision of inclusion and justice for all people in our communities. And today, I am joined by Josh Riddick, who is an organizer with Faith in Indiana. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So for those who are newer at Central or unfamiliar with your work, could you just tell us a little bit more about what Faith in Indiana is and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so Faith in Indiana is a vehicle for building power in everyday people's lives, particularly within the base of people we work with, which are churches. So we are about building power and empowering people to create change in their community through political and social action. We've been involved in policy change across the city, across the state. Central Christian's been a part of that for many years. And so we value that contribution and the contribution of the many other churches that collaborate with us towards some of the changes we work.
So you work at the state and city level, and then are you part of a wider network? Is there national work that goes on as well?
Yeah, so we are part of a regional network of a Midwest organizing cohort, recognizing that in our geopolitical landscape, the Midwest is actually the battleground for democracy. The Midwest is where the decision will be made if our country will slide deeper into white Christian nationalism, white supremacist Christian nationalism, and more fascistic tendencies, or if we'll continue to move towards a multiracial democracy. And so the Midwest is a battleground there. Of course, across the country, it's a battleground. And so we're part of a larger national Faith in Action collective that we work together towards policy change.
Well, so like no pressure or anything on Indiana at all. It's just no big deal. Democracy on the line. When you're talking about building power, can you give just like an example or two about how it is that we do that? Absolutely.
In nearly every level of government, an everyday citizen's voice doesn't manifest into the decisions made by our politicians. The decisions around our city budget, the decisions around state policy, laws similar to what we're seeing right now happen at the State House, those go against the popular will of the people.
Right.
Because our system currently is not designed and is insulating itself from regular folks having access, having a voice, and their impact mattering. And so the work of organizing is building the type of vehicle that can arrive at a place of what we call co-governance. If we build enough power, we can start to demand the type of changes we want to see happen.
Yeah.
A recent example of this is that in Marion County, we talked to over 600 Black folks in the fall, 2,000 people across central Indiana since last summer, and overwhelmingly heard that how the police respond to people with mental health issues, how the police respond to those struggling with substances was inadequate.
Yeah.
And it kept families unsafe, it kept people scared, it did not get people the help that they need. The city of Indianapolis did not have the type of demands that we made on their budget, on their list of priorities. But we built enough power to make that demand of the mayor and created the environment for him to make a decision that was favorable to the community. And so he committed to launching the first ever clinician-led crisis team in Marion County. So this time next year, if not sooner, we will have mental health professionals being dispatched to respond to low-level crimes, to mental health and substance crisis situations, giving people help and not handcuffs. Yeah. And that all came about not because a few of us sat in a back room and said, this is what we should do, or because we cut some private deal with a politician. It's that we built public power with the voice of people who are most impacted.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So one thing that I've noticed in sort of particularly like a white mainline church context is there's some level of anxiety about having a political voice within our congregation, or like congregations exercising their own political voice and their own agency to kind of make change in their own community. It's maybe fine to talk about social issues in the pulpit, but not so much there's more hesitancy in terms of like how do we go out and advocate politically for the changes that we want to see. And I think maybe part of that comes from seeing maybe in like the white evangelical space, how it can be like so completely intertwined, like you mentioned earlier, the nationalism and sort of imposing values that of a minority on all people. Yeah. But I do think it's important for congregations to find that political agency and voice. Can you speak a little bit to like why that's important for all congregations to find their own voice in this?
Absolutely. So, I think just from a couple baseline reasons is one is our tradition points very clearly that Jesus was like a very political figure. Right. And made that very clear in the work that Christ did while on the earth. And I think there's an invitation for us to have an expansive enough theological imagination to inform our political imagination. And one of the tensions that folks run into is that we sometimes think that being political is like talking about voting or go vote for this issue or for that candidate. Voting at the end of the day is the tip of a funnel. That our political lives are so much bigger than that in ways that we may not even fully grasp. I parked outside of the church today and I stumbled over a couple knocked over road closed signs. One, because I'm maybe not that great at walking. But two, the road outside of the church is under construction. And I don't know the status of that road or the state of that road, but there's decisions to fix certain things in this community like roads, like schools, like neighborhoods. That is a policy decision. And to get involved and have a public life and engage in politics is to say we want to have a say in where those resources, those funds, that investment goes to. Yeah. Something that I've found very frustrating is that our city council is pushing forward an ordinance that's going to make it very difficult and to a certain degree illegal to give out clothes or food donations to a group of 10 or more people, mainly targeting folks who are houseless. Right. And in our community, our church is the kind of the baseline provider of some of those things. Right. And so to say, church, you cannot go serve the least of these. You cannot go. I mean, that's a direct affront to the ways in which we've been called to serve and love our neighbor. I know you've been writing about that in the newsletter and talking about that a bit, so folks probably know about it. But it's one of those kind of in-your-face political realities that the church is called to engage in. Right.
A lot of these policies are really aimed at we see that this is a problem, but instead of addressing the root causes of these problems, we just want to make it so that it's harder to see the problem.
Absolutely.
And that is like such a predominant issue in both in the Gospels and in the prophetic literature. And so it really is. There's such a political point of view in the Bible and in what has been handed down to us in our own faith tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in this moment, like this current political moment, there's a lot of disorientation, a lot of confusion. But one thing that I think people are beginning to get extremely clear on is that what is at stake is impacting everyone, has the capacity to impact everyone. Oftentimes, to your question earlier of how can a white mainline institution be involved, sometimes folks enter into this work because they want to help Black people or immigrants or brown folks or poor folks, people who are different than what you may look like or who you may be. And I think what the last few months has been showing us is that the same strand of white supremacy, the same strand of corporate capitalism that has abused Black and brown communities is also interested in abusing everyone. Right. White supremacy at its core is inherently suicidal and is attempting to take everything and everyone down with it for the sake of profit and gain. And so, we're at a point, an inflection point, a turning point where the stakes are so high that we can't afford not to be part of this work because what's at stake?
A word you used earlier sort of sparked this idea of imagination. Like what really are we imagining for our futures? And we can kind of see like one potential path if we continue down this path of this like white supremacist violence, this unfettered economic growth at the expense of real human lives. Like we're looking at like a possible future that does look like really honestly bleak. But I think one thing that can help bolster us is our faith in this idea that many futures are still possible, and so but how can we have the imagination to really say our faith believes in resurrecting new things, what is that new thing, and so how can we imagine all of this new stuff together.
Yeah, that's a really cool image. I love this idea of resurrecting, new things, right? There's some things we have to put to death and allow to die in our country. Ways in which that unfettered capitalism, the ways in which white supremacist authoritarian rule is normalized. And I think some of the things that are possible are for me, in the base of people I've been listening to, we've been engaging, the thing we hear most repeatedly is the imagination of a community where people get help and not handcuffs.
Yeah.
Where our jails and prisons aren't the primary place where people in crisis get help. And to begin to arrive at that place requires dismantling and reimagining things that hold us back. Like Indianapolis, I think 40% of the budget goes to police.
Right.
Police department who overwhelmingly says we don't want to handle mental health calls. But our city is so strapped with money funding that system that we struggle to imagine something different.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I was reading about the new community justice campus, there's when I was reading about it, at its full capacity, we'll have the capacity to incarcerate 500 more people than we had downtown. But they also have sort of the drug rehabilitation center there as well. When I was looking at the numbers, they can put at full capacity 60 people into the drug deferment program, but we can incarcerate 3,000 people. So just seeing the huge imbalance of when the reality is that so many people who are incarcerated, a lot of their issues stem from lacking very basic resources. And so to spend $500 million on just moving people who are incarcerated sort of, again, out of the public eye. It's away from downtown now. It's this other part of the city that does not get as much traffic. And then to have this branding of it as the community justice center, it's really it's a lot to
absolutely
handle.
I mean, the irony is astounding.
Yeah.
And the way in which that is celebrated as a good thing is astounding. The ways in which we could avoid so many people having to ever enter the carceral system if we housed people.
Yeah.
If we made sure people had access to education and food. We made sure people were safe in their communities. Yet, we allow our city and our state to invest in things that actively prevent those creations from coming to life.
Yeah. I would love to hear just a little bit more from you about in the coming months, especially with issues around mental health and policing. Sounds like there might be some entry points for a place like Central to help advocate for communities that protect all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Marion County, our organizing work here has made so crystal clear. I mean, we helped win the Red Line and the Purple and Blue Line through our transit movement. We have the most civilian controlled and civilian oversight of any police department in Indiana, probably the Midwest, maybe the country. We got significant investments from gun violence intervention programs and now this mental health crisis response system. These things are good, but we've learned time and time again that the State House has made an effort to undermine that progress. And unless we start to build the type of power that can engage the state, we will continue to have limitations on what's possible in Indiana. We need folks from Central Christian to build power with us. Yeah. We need the type of multiracial coalition that could stand against the narratives of not enoughness, stare against the narratives of demonization and ostracizing the other. We need folks from this congregation to help us lead in that narrative shift and building power to contest that at the state level. And one of the ways we want to do that is through an issue that in the state of Indiana is the only bipartisan issue right now. The only issue that's uniting people in our government, and that is mental health. So if we can build power there, we can then continue to expand, moving towards more difficult issues like housing, more difficult issues like education, more difficult issues like climate change, and eventually build the type of power that can roll back some of the harmful laws that are being passed, are going to soon be passed, and have been passed years ago. But that starts with building as much power as we can in the moment. So we are organizing teams, congregations around getting legislation passed that would fund a crisis response system. We say from call to care.
Okay.
So we need 988, which just rolled out a couple weeks ago. It's a mental health crisis line. But our local dispatch needs to be better supported. And most of our communities need better local dispatch. We need crisis teams that can be dispatched by those call centers to help people in need. And then we need more places to go. We cannot have a reality where in our county there are 30 beds for rehabilitation and care and 3,000 beds for jail. We need to have a different equation, and we cannot build that unless we establish enough power to do so. So we're seeking to see legislation passed for that. We're engaging a number of stakeholders in the State House, in the governor's office, advocacy groups, to build the type of narrative that says people need help and not handcuffs.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I am really looking forward to seeing how people at Central can sort of tap into our own networks and to be able to build power with faith in Indiana. I know it's something that has been a passion at Central for a long time, but with the pandemic, with so many like competing concerns right now, it seems like now is a good time to get re-engaged.
Absolutely. We're so excited to welcome y'all back.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you.